You're already on mute. Thank you. Good evening. It's time for us to begin. Before we get started, we'll have prayer here in a minute. Any update on any of the sick? I know Janet and Deborah are not here tonight. They went to visit Joe, and I guess Joe Reed has COVID, so they were exposed. So she asked me if she wanted me to stay out of the office. I said, well, no, you can go to the office, just stay away from me. So she was in for a while today, but she said she wasn't going to be here tonight with Deborah. She didn't want to be around others, and just in case, be safe. Any other updates on any of the others? Bless you. Ernestine died. Tim's mom was moved to a rehab facility today. I know I talked to him earlier. He's on his way to Arkansas right now. He said when Walmart calls, you answer. So he was going to Arkansas to meet with them, but he'll be back tomorrow. And then next Tuesday, they're going to South Carolina. Not sure when he'll be back. He's hopeful that she'll be released about the time when they're there. If he has to stay an extra day or two, that he can be able to bring them home. They did say they missed being here. They missed us. And so continue to keep Tim's mom and dad in your prayers. Anybody else? Okay. Joe, will you lead us in a word of prayer, please? Amen. Thank you, Joe. We're in Proverbs Chapter 16, if you want to turn there. Proverbs Chapter 16. After last Wednesday night, I was really concerned that I might lose my job. Bill did such a great job last week, except he only got through 7 verses. But I don't usually get much further, so it's okay. So it is what it is. But a great discussion last week, and I really appreciate Bill filling in for me. Actually, Bill was filling in for Richard, who was filling in for me. But a big thanks to Bill. It was kind of a last-minute thing, and I'll never do what I did to him again. I called him, and I gave him an out right off the bat. I said, now you can say no. Everybody else has. And he said, well, good, that's good. And he said he would do it. So next time I'm not giving you the out. But we left off at the end of verse 7. So I want to look at verse 8 and look at a couple other verses here. And I think I got them on the slide here. Yeah, chapter 16, verse 8 says, better is a little with righteousness than vast revenues without justice. Now, one of the things that we're going to see as we get along here, and I'm sure Bill saw this, and we'll talk about some of the things y'all talked about last week as well. In verses 10 through 15, he's going to address his sons as kings and talk about kingship and how rulers are to rule. But these aren't just precepts that are important for kings. Better is a little with righteousness than vast revenues without justice. What do you think he's saying here? Y'all were more talkative with Bill. Come on. What's he saying?
It's better to have just less and have a clear conscience.
Okay.
Be at peace in your mind than to have the world and be guilty.
What is peace of mind, peace of heart, a clear conscience? What is that worth to us?
Everything.
Is it? If you don't have those things, what's your life like? What's that? Miserable, turmoil, right? And I think that's kind of what he's getting at here. You can have all the wealth in the world. You can have all the toys in the world. You know, my nephew told me, or my brother told me, my nephew who's 19, he's working for some friends of ours we grew up with in a well and pump business, and he's drilling wells for this guy. He's saved over $8,000 in just a few months because he wants to build a barnuminium. He wants to build a house with a barn attached to it, with big windows, so he said he can get up every morning and go to the windows, look out over his barn, and see all of his toys. That's what he wants. I said, it's great to have a dream. But what is having all those toys? What is having all these valuable possessions and all this stuff if you don't have a clear conscience? Right? If you're not exercising justice in your life, righteousness, godliness in your life, right? Absolutely. James chapter 4, it's like a vapor that appears for a little time and vanishes away. I talked about that Monday at my grandmother's memorial service. She was 96 years old. You know, and I think about that. That sounds like a long time. You know, Grandpa would have been 100 years old Monday when we had her memorial service. It was his birthday. It would have been his birthday. He would have been 100 years old. She was 96. But I remember the day Grandpa died. I remember standing at his bedside 2 months before Colleen and I were married, and that was 28 years ago. But Richard, it just seems like it was yesterday. 96 years may seem like a long time, but I think it's Psalm 50, is it 50:10? The days of man are 70 and 70 years, and if by strength of days they be 80 years, they are but labor and toil. Soon they are cut off, and we fly away. He goes on in Psalm to say that life is like a blade of grass. Withers, dies, it's gone. All of these things are temporal. One of these days, the world's going to burn up in a big fire. It's all going to be gone. What are we going to have left? Right? So it's better to have righteousness with little than vast revenues without justice. If we jump down to verse 16, he says, how much better to get wisdom than gold? And to get understanding is to be chosen rather than silver. Again, I wanted to tie a couple of these verses together here in chapter 16 because the message is basically the same, isn't it? How much better is it to have wisdom? What will wisdom gain us? Well, we just talked about the idea that if we don't live right, if we don't live with righteousness and justice as the focus of our lives, that it leads to turmoil, it leads to heartache, it leads to all these difficulties, no peace, not a clear conscience, right? But what will wisdom give us? What will wisdom give us? It gives us understanding so that we can know how to walk righteously. We can know how to walk justly in this world. Now we'll come back to a big reason why a lot of times we don't pursue wisdom and understanding, and why we end up in turmoil and trouble and suffering and all those other things. We'll come back to that in a minute. But wisdom and understanding lead us in the right way so that we can make the kind of decisions in our lives that lead to peace, that lead to a clear conscience, that lead to hope. Better than silver or gold. And then in verse 19 he says, better to be of a humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoils, basically the spoils of war, the plunder, with the proud. Why do you think he says this? Well, if you look at verse 18, we'll come back to this in a few moments. if we get to verse 18. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. All right. So let me back up here. We want to pursue a life that is righteous and just, right? Because if we don't pursue a life that's righteous and just, it leads to turmoil, to difficulties, to pain, to suffering, and not only to ourselves. When we're not living a life of righteousness and godliness, does it affect those around us as well? Sure it does. And who does it usually affect more than anybody else? Family, children, those closest to us, right? And so, if we want to pursue a life of righteousness and godliness and justice, then we have to be willing to pursue understanding and wisdom. And in order to pursue wisdom and understanding, what do we have to do? We have to humble ourselves. What usually stands in the way of the pursuit of wisdom and understanding? You ever tried to talk to a teenager, somebody in their early 20s that doesn't want to listen? I'm telling myself again here. I tried to have a conversation with my 24-year-old son last week when we were up there, and it did not go well. Right? Because he don't want to hear it. He don't want to hear it. I'm just nagging at him. I'm just bothering him. Right? Why do you think I'm... So he's had problems with his car. I suggested, I helped, find a couple friends of mine up there that helped him change the brakes on it. He was still having trouble with it. Gave him a number of somebody else that could help him with it. Over 6-8 months ago, he still hasn't taken it to this individual because, I don't want to deal with it. Well, what are you going to do if something catastrophic happens and it costs you $600-800 to fix it? Oh, no. You ever talk to anybody like this? Son, what's going to happen if you do that? Well, hopefully, and this was his last words, he said, well, hopefully it'll take me out with it. And he got it and went to the bedroom. Oh, okay, I'm done. Yeah. But when we let our pride and our arrogance stand in the way, and we won't humble ourselves and open ourselves up to wisdom and instruction, it leads to a life of unrighteousness and suffering and pain, turmoil. Thoughts, comments on how to live a better life? Okay. Okay. All right. We'll come back to that in a moment. Verse 9. Saturday. Short up here. Now it's not. Go ahead. I think it depends. I think I would, and just off the top of my head, since you just sprung that on me, I would point at two places: the home and society. I think without the kind of home life that we need to have, the structure that we need to have, the godly structure that we need to have, I think it leads to that. But I think our society has also gotten to a point where it exacerbates this idea of pride, arrogance. I mean, I heard a politician the other day come out and start talking about this idea of equity, and that everybody needs to have equal opportunity, and if we were all if we had a structured environment of equity, then we could all achieve the same things and we could all achieve whatever we wanted to achieve. And my thought was, I'm a 55-year-old man. I'm 5'10", 5'10 and a half, 200 and none of your business. And I can't jump. You mean there's still hope I could be an NBA basketball player? Awesome. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen, right? But we live in a society that people are that arrogant that they think that, well, you can be anything you want to be. Now, I want to be careful here because I want all of us to reach our fullest potential. I want my children to reach their fullest potential. Listen, I want to be a realist, right? There are some things that are beyond my purview. There's some things that I'll never achieve in this life because it's just not what I'm cut out for. I don't have the aptitude for it or whatever. Sure.
Because the American dream is based on the fact that anybody, in theory, that if we work hard enough, if we try to do the right things, if we go out and get with us an education or we go get a job that we do, then we can succeed. Well, taking it to the extreme, what you just said,
right.
Say, well, the American dream is just a bunch of malarkey, because you're limited by your capabilities. So, I mean, it's just as bad.
Well, no, I wouldn't. No, I don't think that's what I said.
Right, but what I'm saying is that if you're saying that, okay, well, I can only be X, taken to its ultimate extreme was like what we're getting away from in Europe when we came to America, which was, okay, you're born into this class, and we're telling you that your whole family is this way, so you're this way. That's the ultimate extreme, that direction. The other extreme is, oh, I can be 10 foot tall just by willing myself.
Right, yeah.
But both of them are just as...
Well, sure.
Yeah.
And both are, and I think my point is both are an arrogant approach to life. And I don't know, I think, and I've said this before, the reason people don't respond to the gospel anymore publicly, because of pride.
Well, I didn't really mean to spring all that.
That's okay.
Well, what I kind of want to get to is you can have two individuals raised in the same home, same opportunity, same church life, basically the same society, and those two individuals will not turn out to be the same.
Right.
You potentially could have one that does have a lot of pride and arrogance, and the other is humble and meek as you can
Right.
find.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it boils down to, yes, there are external influences in society, your home life,
Right.
church life, but it all really comes down to how do you respond to things.
Oh, yeah.
It's a personal choice.
Yeah.
And if you can be selfish,
Mm-hmm.
and pride and arrogance and all that's going to come to you.
Yeah. Y'all remember Dr. Ben Carson? Has anybody ever read his book, Helping Hands? It's a great, great book. When you go back and you look at where he was raised, the environment that he was raised in, he rose up and overcome that. Now, part of it was because of his upbringing. He had a single mother, but she insisted that they read. She insisted that they got good grades. And, she was very strict in some of those things. But there was an internal fortitude in his heart and mind that he wasn't going to be relegated to this life like all of his friends were. That he was going to rise up and overcome, and he was determined to do that. And that was an internal fortitude that he had to overcome. And so I agree with you. I can't say that it's one or the other. Is it nature or nurture? I think it's both, right? And sometimes nature has a greater influence on that. Sometimes nurture has a greater influence over that. But everybody's different, right? But it all boils down to the decisions that I make. So Can I, if I'm a proud man, if I'm an arrogant man, can I become a humble man? But how does that happen? What's that?
When you fall on your face, when you get home. You know, when, like you're talking about your son.
Yeah.
When we were his age, we're the exact same way. And then when we got left on the roadside, when our brakes went out and we couldn't stop, and then we were like, oh my goodness, or we got stuck having to pay $1,200 for something that we could have
Right.
worked out for $100 that we didn't have.
Right.
You know, so
Well, and that's what Colleen and I have talked about. You know, we love him, we want to help him, but, you know, if at this point, he's just going to have to hit rock bottom to wake up, you know, and that will humble him, or it won't. I mean, and it'll be up to him, right? That's a scary thought. But how many of us have been in the same situation? I mean, there's been times in my life that I've been humbled by life.
But how do you think he would grow and learn if you took it and got his start?
Exactly.
So, I mean, I think we have a lot of that happening in society today. We don't let our children fail
Right.
and learn. And so if they get to be adults, they're still,
They're entitled.
yes.
Well, that's probably maybe some of this equality or your potential between that. Equality is something that we look around the world that never happened. I don't care what country you look at, you bring people up to a standard of equality, it doesn't exist.
And let me say this. I don't think we'll ever have equality of outcome. But there always should be equality of opportunity. Yeah, God has put within all of us the freedom to choose. That's potential. That's opportunity. Right? Now, there are all kinds of external forces and there are other limiting factors that are going to limit outcome. I hate math. Never good at it. I was never going to be a math teacher. It's not going to happen. Right? No matter how much effort and stuff I might have put into it. Now I may be limiting myself because I'm such an intelligent guy. But I don't think I could have. You know, my aptitude was in other places, right? So somebody else, you may be great at math. I don't know. No, you're not. Wrong person to ask. Right? But somebody else could be great at math. We're not going to have the same opportunity of outcome in that area. But we all have the same opportunity. We need to have that equity of opportunity. Does God give us equity of opportunity in Christ? Absolutely. Come unto me, all ye that labor heavy laden, I will give you rest. But not only does he give us equity of opportunity, what else does he give us? Equity of outcome. That's the only place you'll ever find it. That's the only place you'll ever find it. But going back to Richard's comment, and we could go back, and I talked about this in Tim's 2 minutes a week or so ago. Paul said in Romans chapter 6, you choose, right? You decide whether you're going to yield yourself unto righteousness and godliness, or whether you're going to give yourself unto Satan and ungodliness. It's up to you. In that sense, God is what we would call a libertarian, right? God gives you the freedom to choose. At the same time, if you make the right choices, there are rewards. If you make the wrong choices, there are consequences. Always are. Right? But can we overcome consequences even when we make the wrong choices? Sure we can. But we have to be willing to humble ourselves, put in the effort. Right? All right. Verse 9. How far did you get last week? Verse 9. I know, right? Verse 9 says, a man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. Now again, Richard, this goes back to what you were saying. Now, the Lord can direct our steps, our paths to righteousness and godliness. But there's a burden on me to choose that path, right? And I think y'all talked about it last week with verses 1 and 2, right? We had look back at verses 1 and 2. The preparation of the heart belonged to man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. All the ways of man are pure in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the spirits. So in other words, I think y'all talked about standards last week. Remember that? And I had this discussion with Philip the other day. I preached a sermon years ago on standards, and this is what I did. I took a dowel rod. It was about yay long. And I asked several people, how long you think that is? Guess, what's the distance, Randy, between my fingers? 22 inches. Good. Bill?
I'll go with that.
You'll go with that? You're agreeing with him. Okay. Richard? I'm trying to keep him as straight as I can. 20 inches. Are we ever going to be able to come to a definitive conclusion based on this? No. So then I took that dowel rod and I laid it on the scales. Will that tell us how long that dowel rod is? Why not? It's a standard, isn't it? Scales are a standard of measure. So why won't it tell us how long it is? It's not the right standard, right? So then I put it in a like a 1 cup pitcher, right, a measuring cup. That tell us, it's a standard, but what's wrong with that? It won't tell us what? It's the wrong standard. So then I got a yardstick out, and I held it up on the yardstick, but I held it like in the middle or on the wrong end. Did that really help too much?
Yeah, because that's when you do the math.
Then you got to do the math, right? Right? But if you apply the proper standard and apply it properly to whatever it is, then you can have a definitive answer that we can all agree on. Who gives us that standard?
But this is one of the places, just ask yourself, who's in charge?
Who's in charge? All right? God. Right. So God's given us the standard, right? But I have to apply the standard properly to my life for it to work. Right? So then he says in verse 17, the highway of the upright is to depart from evil. He who keeps his way preserves his soul. And then verse 25. And this is familiar to all of us, right? There's a way that seems right unto a man, but what? Its ends are the way of death. And then the last verse, verse 33. The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. When I make a decision in my life with regard to whatever, and I think, again, Bill talked about this last week, I need to be asking myself, is this the will of the Lord? Now, I'll add this to what y'all talked about last week. There are some things that are rather trite. They don't, there's some decisions that you make that the Lord's going to go, well, whatever you decide, just fine, right? What you have for supper tonight. The Lord's, okay, that's fine. But there are some things that we need to ask. Is this the will of the Lord? Now, when I think of that, what I like to think in my mind is this. Is doing what I want to do in any way going to violate the standard? That has to be, Randy, my first question. I want to do X, Y, Z. Does that violate God's standard? If the answer is yes, what? Then you don't do it. Now, I say I want to do this. Does it violate God's standard? No. Do I still go ahead and do it? Maybe, maybe not. Will doing this cause somebody else to stumble? It may not violate God's standard in and of itself, but how might this affect those around me? Will it be an encouragement to others? Is it really necessary? Is there a better use of my time, my money, my efforts, And there are a lot of other things that we need to take into thought there. And I think that's what he's saying here in these verses. Look, there's some things that when we make decisions, we need to look at the path and we need to first ask the question, is this in accordance with God's standard? And if it is, wonderful. If it's not, don't do it, period. And if it is in accordance with his standard, if it doesn't violate his standard, then there's some other things you have to consider. Will this help me moving forward as a Christian? Will this help my brother or sister in Christ? Will this help my family? There's a lot of other things we need to take into account. Let's verses 10 through 15. As I mentioned before, this is this dialogue, this instruction to kings. He says in verse 10, divination is on the lips of the king. His mouth must not transgress in judgment. The word divination here really, these are divine decisions. These are verdicts that would be handed down from the king for those who would come before him. And especially in this situation, who's the king we're talking about here? Generally, in this era time, well, who are we talking about? Okay, Solomon or any of the kings of Israel, Judah, right? Who are they? Who appointed them? Who appointed these kings? The people did, but God set this government up. Who are they supposed to be? God's mouthpiece for the people. He is God's shepherd for the people. And time again, if we go back, and we'll do this at some point, we'll go back and we'll look at like the kings of Judah, the kings of the northern kingdom of Israel. We'll look at them individually. Every king of the northern kingdom of Israel was what? Evil. Every one of them. Why? Well, and we'll come back to this later, but at the end of this, we get time. But almost every single one of them was because their judgments weren't just. When it came to widows and orphans and the stranger and how they treated those people, the lowly in their society, they weren't just. They weren't righteous. They weren't godly. These men are the lips of God. Divination, divine decisions, God's verdicts are on the king's lips. His mouth must not transgress in judgment. In other words, his mouth must not be unfaithful. His mouth must not be unfair. He must not betray his duty as God's shepherd over his people. And that's what he's saying here. In verse 11, honest weights and scales are the Lord's. All the weights in the bag are his work. In other words, they're his concerns. Again, God has set the standard. That's what he's saying here. God has set the standard, and the king's obligation is to speak for God. Okay? Verses 12 and 13. It is an abomination. I know you all talked about that word last week. It's an abomination for kings to commit wickedness, for a throne is established by righteousness. Again, the king is God's representative among the people. And the king is supposed to hate wickedness. For him to enact wickedness in his own life was an abomination before God. Okay? Righteous lips are the delight of kings, and they love him who speaks what is right. A messenger of death is the king's wrath, but a wise man will appease it. In the light of the king's face is life, and his favor is like a cloud of latter rain. Jeremiah 21 and verse 12 says, O house of David, who is Jeremiah speaking to the king, basically. He says, House of David, thus says the Lord, execute judgment in the morning and deliver him who is plundered out of the hand of the oppressors. lest my fury go forth like fire and burn, so that no one can quench it because of the evil of your doings. What's he telling the king here? Be just. Be fair. Be righteous. Right? In chapter 22 and verse 3, thus says the Lord, execute judgment in righteousness. Deliver the plundered out of the hand of the oppressor. Again, time and time again. The king is God's advocate for the people who are oppressed, the people that are lowly, the people that are poor, that are hurting, that are suffering. And the king is supposed to be protecting them and serving them, not causing the oppression, right? Do no wrong and do no violence to the stranger, the fatherless, the widow, nor shed innocent blood in this place. Malachi chapter 3 verse 5. And I will come near you for judgment. I will be a swift witness against sorcerers, against adulterers, against perjurers, against those who exploit wage earners and widows and orphans, against those who turn away an alien because they do not fear me. Every one of those kings of the northern kingdom of Israel were wicked. Why? Because they didn't fear God. They didn't fear God enough to listen to him and do his will.
You think about that southern kingdom too.
Yeah.
The ones that was just like the northern kingdom, you know, they just took a big note of the whole kingdom.
Right.
Like the northern did. And then you'd have someone that would...
You'd have someone like Hezekiah that would come along and his reforms and... Mm-hmm. That's right. Who are God's representatives today? We are. What does God expect from us? To be just, to be fair, right? To protect those who need protection, to love and care about those who are hurting. When somebody repents, what are we supposed to do? When somebody asks for forgiveness, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to love them and forgive them. Pray for them and encourage them and help them and do everything we can to lift them up. That's our job. You know, if we go back and we look at those kings again, the other side of that coin is the other thing that they didn't do was worship God according to his will. Well, what is our job as Christians today? I think we can boil it down to two areas. Worship God as he has commanded us to worship him, and care and serve others the way God would have us care and serve for others. Well, I think we'd go a long way if we just did those two things. Right? Humbled and exalted. And we're almost out of time. And last week, Bill had 2 minutes left and he quit. That's what I heard him say. He said, we got 2 minutes left. Karen said he did. You did. She did. Thank you, Karen. Again, verse 18, again, and we touched on this earlier. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Chapter 18, verse 12 says, before destruction, the heart of the man is haughty, and before honor is humility. How many of us want to be destroyed in this life or the next? Or how many of us would love to be honored in this life and the next? He lays it out pretty clearly here, doesn't he? If you want to be honored, humble yourself. God will lift you up. Right? But if you're going to be proud and arrogant, God will bring you low. A couple more here real quick. A man's pride, Proverbs 29:23, a man's pride will bring him low, but the humble in spirit will retain honor. I saw this quote. I'll end with this. Let us not fear the pride of others, but fear pride in ourselves. If we do this, we'll go a long way to being the kind of people God would have us to be. All right, we'll pick up in verse 20 next week. Thank y'all.